The next portion of the demonstration that we're going to look at and demonstrate is the frames environment. And we're also going to, once we've developed some frames, we're also going to add some weld beads to those frames. So let's go ahead and get started. Obviously, you've already seen us use the configuration tool, and what I'm going to use is the change our configuration to that of the 05 frame, which is going to allow us to focus in on the frame that's currently being used in the Iron Eagle. Now, the first question you might ask is, how did we develop this frame? And that's what this particular demo is focused around. So this is what the frame looks like, and let's take a look at how we can actually do that. So I'm going to go to a different configuration and just show you how the frame environment works. So I'm going to change our display configuration to where I've already got a sketch created, and you can see I've got a part out there, and actually I'm going to add a support piece of frame for this component that we have turned on. Now, in order to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and right mouse button click and open up this assembly. Takes us right into the subassembly where we can add the framework. Now, before I begin, I'm going to go up to our tools menu and go into the frame environment. Within the frame environment, we have a couple of commands to speak of. The first one is the sketch environment, if you want to just simply sketch out where the frames will be placed. Another part of the frame environment is to be able to add lines and arcs to the sketches as well, and that's what we're going to do to go ahead and add a U-shaped wireframe so that we can add some frames around here for supporting purposes. So I'm going to go ahead and kick off by clicking on the line segment command, and it's going to bring up this line segment tips dialog. Now, once you get used to this dialog and understand the commands that it offers, you can easily turn it off by just clicking on the don't show this dialog. But we're going to use the O, which allows us to offset from an endpoint. So I'll go ahead and dismiss this, and I'm going to use the O command, and you'll notice that as I start sketching a line, I can pick up the endpoint, and of course across the top it's going to give us the DX offset values. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to key in a -215. That's going to put us back a little ways from the endpoint, 215 millimeters back. Now, as we start developing this segment or line segment, we also have this triad to assist us. And by using the X key, I can lock into a plane, or by using the Z key, I can lock into an axis. In this case, I want to lock into the Z axis and come right up to the bottom of the component. I'm going to continue using the triad to come across, and I can depict how far I want to go just by coming over and selecting this line. That way I know I'm at the exact length. And then again, lock into the Z axis to come down and just touch that line. So now that I know that my 2D lines are in the right location and right underneath the bottom of this where we can build a support, we are ready to begin placing some frames. So the first thing that we want to do is we're going to go up and use the frame command. And when I select the frame command, you'll notice that Solid Edge ST3 offers the user several different options for placing frames, whether it's different corner treatment. In this case, maybe we'll use the but one option. We can extend frame components, we can apply radiuses to them, and we can also select whether or not we want single frames for collinear or multiple frames for each linear segment. So with those options, we can go ahead and click on the OK button, and then the system goes out and it asks us, okay, which frames do you want to select? And as we select them, it's going to add them to our pull-down list so that we can easily select them down the road as we use the frame environment. They're already in the selection pull-down menu. So for this first frame, I'm just going to go ahead and grab this square tubing. And basically, all we have to do is identify the line segments to place that frame on. I'm going to identify the 3 outside main segments, and by just right mouse button clicking, it's going to take the cross section of that frame and place it right on our 2D sketches. Now when we're done with that, obviously there's options to move those frames around if they're not located in the right place, or if we want to make any kind of adjustments, but we'll look at those options in a minute. What I'm going to do is I want to place another piece of frame, and in this case we're going to go ahead and use let's use the butt 2 option, get a better idea what that does. And we're also going to use a 20 by 20 piece of frame, a little bit smaller piece of frame, and I'm just going to step around and identify these line segments that we created, plus these 2 cross members here. So now I've got the 2 cross members and our U shape that we created earlier, and by right mouse button clicking, it's going to place those frames into the position that we are looking for. Now, one of the different things that you're going to notice is when this bigger frame was placed, it was placed with the starting point right at the center of that 2D sketch. But depending on how the actual cross section is created, the user does have the option to set their start points anywhere in that sketch. And in this case, you'll notice that these particular square tubes were on the lower left corner. So what happens if we want to make a change to that? Well, Solid Edge offers tools for you to easily make a change by just using the Modify Cross Section. You'll notice when I click on the Modify Cross Section, all of the cross sections for each one of these smaller 20 by 20 pieces of frame highlights. Well, I don't want to adjust them all at the same time, so I'm just going to deselect them and then manually select the 2 that I want to change. I actually want to put the cross section so that it's centered about those 2D sketches. Now I'm going to zoom up on one. It will actually be applied to both, but as I zoom up on one and accept, you'll notice that we now have some options that I can simply turn on by defining the handle point. And basically all this does is allows us to turn on the different information that's available and allows me to change the location of that cross section to the 2D sketch. In this case, we want it to be right on the center, so I'm just going to come over to that center point and click, and you'll notice how the cross section automatically updates and puts it right in the center of that 2D sketch. So very easy to use, very easy to manipulate, and to get the outcome that you're looking for as a customer. After all, we need to deliver tools that allow you to get your job done quickly. Another thing that I want to point out is that we use the butt 2 option, which means the 2 shorter sections are butted up against the longer section. While I'm in this command, I can come over and maybe I want to change that to butt 1, and notice what happens on those end pieces when I change that. Notice how they change, and the long piece now butts up against the 2 shorter pieces. In fact, if we want, we could even change it to miter corner treatment. So again, all the options available so that our users can achieve the correct outcome that they're looking for. Now again, we need to make some changes to our cross section. This is a little bit too close to the edge, so I'm going to go back to the Modify Cross Section option. Again, all of them highlight, but now I'm only interested in changing the ones in the back, so I'm just going to deselect and identify these 2 end ones and accept them. And for this one, we want to pick its center point as well, and you notice how it moves those cross sections over to the center. Another thing that we need to do is this piece did not shift with it because we didn't ask to shift that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to modify cross section again, and this time I'm going to pick this cross section, and I'm going to move it over to its top center, and you notice how it locks into position very quickly. Now once we're done creating our pieces of frame that we're looking for, you'll notice that that frame fits very nice underneath the sheet metal bracket, which is going to support the seat. So that's what we're looking for, and it's very quick and easy to place different pieces of framework out here. And you'll notice too, one thing I want to point out is when frames are placed, if they're placed against other pieces of frame, you'll notice that even though the sketch extends into the side of this frame into the middle, that our frame environment is smart enough to know that these pieces of frame need to be cut off as they match up with other pieces of frame. Once we're done with that, we can basically come over, and I'm going to hide all of our paths, and I'm also going to hide the sketches that was used to create those frames. I'm going to pop back up to the top level of the subassembly. At this point, I'm also going to turn off that sheet metal bracket so you can kind of see what we're going to do, because what I want to do is I also want to not only place frames, but I also want to be able to add weld beads to these frames. How do we attach them together? Well, under the Tools tab, same place we found the frame environment, we also have a weldment assembly where we can create a weldment assembly out of these pieces of frame, and all we have to do is just mark it as a weldment assembly. Now once that's done, that gives us the features to start creating weld beads. And I'm going to show you how we can do this very quickly by grabbing the fillet weld. It's going to bring up a dialog which allows you to key in some different values depending on what you want on your callouts, and of course you can save those settings. And basically I'm going to change this to a 4mm thread, and I'm going to turn off this dialog, set that as my default 4mm. Then I'm just going to identify the cross members that I want to add a weld bead to. So you identify the cross members you want to add a weld bead to. So after you identify those four, we're going to accept them. And then what are they welded to? Well, if I identify these two larger 50 by 50 pieces of frame, and right mouse button click, we're ready to preview, and the system automatically goes out and adds the weld beads for each one of those connections where the 20 by 20 meets the larger piece of frame. Now for a little bit more difficult a weld bead, for example, you'll notice how this piece of frame kind of overhangs here. We have a different command called groove weld. And again, we try to provide you with the several different options so that you can create different types of weld beads depending on the situation. So in this case, all we have to do is identify the faces that the weld bead is going to extend to from this piece. So I'm just going to identify these three top pieces, and I'm going to accept them with the right mouse button click. I'm then going to, you'll notice down here, the system's always prompting the user. Now once you, as a side note, once you get used to Solid Edge, you probably won't find yourself looking down here much because you already understand the commands. But for the first time in, it gives the new user the idea of what Solid Edge is looking for. So we'll go ahead and accept that face, and then it's asking to identify the outside curve and the inside curve. And then if we want to extend instead of normal to base, we want to just extend to those surfaces, we can do that very easily by changing those options. And when we're done, we can click on the preview button, and Solid Edge will very quickly generate a weld bead between those two pieces of framework. Now we can go do the same thing on the opposite side, but I always like to make my job as easy as possible, and I think we all do. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to grab the groove weld that we just created. Then I can grab the weld option, and I'm going to do parallel plane, use the parallel plane option. Then going to pick a parallel plane, set this to midpoint, gives you different options of where you want that plane to be. And once I get the midpoint of this cross member, I click on it, and you'll notice that it immediately mirrors about the center of this distance to the opposite side. And now I've got two weld beads on my part very quickly. This kind of gives you just a quick idea of how easy it is to create frames in Solid Edge ST3. And then once those frames are placed, you can easily manipulate the location of the frames by modifying their cross sections, and then you can add weld beads to those frames by creating a weldment from this subassembly. When you're done, we're ready to go on to the next portion of the demonstration. So this concludes the weldment and frame demonstration.